Well, I don't think there's any other group globally that has the global presence and global reach that ICG has.
The Crisis Group is really providing the international community with a public good.
It represents, if there is such a thing, a kind of international public interest. It doesn't cater to a national point of view.
They give us insight. We didn't always agree with them, and it is not their role to try to come into agreement with us. It is their role to reflect ground truth.
The fieldwork that is being done by people on the spot is something that you don't find anywhere else.
Crisis Group was always regarded as being the heavyweight contribution, the one you really had to read.
It has really redefined or invented a new kind of activist NGO that does more than analyze situations, does more than just identify solutions, but gets down at ground level and works those solutions.
Let's just bring you some breaking news. We're getting out of East Timor. We're being told rebel soldiers have attacked the home of the president, Jose Ramos Horta. That coming from a military spokesman. Last month, an international crisis group said that East Timor was at a risk of an upsurge in civil unrest unless authority was transferred back to the police.
The overall position seems to be, as the International Crisis Group says about Afghanistan in their report today, that the war is not lost, but it's not looking good.
It's very much more difficult to tackle this sort of insurgency when you have terrorist tactics, suicide bombers. These are very difficult things to prevent.
A report released this week from the International Crisis Group indicates that Zimbabwe is closer than ever to a collapse.
Fresh calls are being made for African nations to intervene to prevent Zimbabwe from edging ever closer to complete collapse. The independent think tank, the International Crisis Group, is warning too many African leaders remain supporters of President Mugabe's regime.
So we want to see a situation whereby SADC and the AU actually play a complementary role in pushing for a mediation in Zimbabwe.
To me, one of the most important features is the timeliness of its report. It's very hard to produce, as Crisis Group does, timely sets of recommendations of very high quality, very sophisticated.
Pour les gens qui s'intéressent au monde, à la planète, les rapports, les publications de ICG sont indispensables.
These reports are better than anything I saw in the government in early warnings of crises to come.
There are many issues in the international arena that come out of a clear blue sky that no one predicted. It's a tiny cloud on the horizon one day and a thunderstorm breaking over your head the next. An organisation like Crisis Group getting out a fast report, which is covering the broad technicalities, I think certainly helps to formulate opinion.
My sense is that in Lebanon, Crisis Group had very high quality access to all the voices that mattered to come up with a timely prescription.
During my time as Secretary of State, we used the International Crisis Group and its reports on a regular basis. We knew that we were getting valuable input. In Darfur, for example, when that tragedy started to unfold, the International Crisis Group was ringing the bell.
To actually be able to go in with the crisis group and bring out these artifacts of pain and these artifacts of what was being lost and destroyed made for such a more effective advocacy effort. The crisis group brought one of these notebooks found in the wreckage and in the charred remains of this village to the Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, and presented it to him. And when he saw this notebook, which was this child, again, just wanting to grow up and have a life and educate himself, and Ban Ki-moon looked at this notebook and said, "This is the first time I really feel like I understand what these atrocities are about."
Many of these conflicts are quite complex. They have undercurrents, they change over time, and it's very necessary to have people who are expert, who have very good contacts, and who speak truth to power, who actually see the situation as it is, not the spinning that goes on of how a government or even an opposition may want to have it characterised.
I have a difference of opinion with ICG. I think more credit should have been given to Mr. Musharraf. However, I also found it very beneficial to have another group saying many of these things publicly.
The International Crisis Group, which is a very respectable NGO, have come up with several measures which I think echo the sentiments of the people of Pakistan.
By my meeting with ICG, although I don't necessarily bless their recommendations, the word gets out to the Pakistanis that I had met with them and listened to what they had to say. It was an implicit way of putting pressure on President Musharraf. I used ICG as something that forced me to get out of my usual thought patterns, to get out of my usual comfort zone, to getting material from the CIA or from the State Department or the Defense Department. Did it change my opinion on all things? No. Did it add to it? Yes. Did it make me a better public servant? I think so. Did it make me better able to communicate at congressional hearings? Absolutely so.
The Iraq report is one of the most valuable reports because he gives a realistic perspective what's going on in the country.
Everybody was wondering who these insurgents, terrorists, resistance were.
On the one hand, we are used to reading the newspaper day by day about terror attacks. On the other hand, it's also a very unknown insurgency.
Here's what the insurgency is about. Not a mystery. It's not a puzzle. They're not hiding it. They're broadcasting it.
The International Crisis Group were the first to give a much more accurate map of who these people were.
This is, I think, one of the big advantages of the Crisis Group. They have access not only to state actors, but also to non-state actors. They have access to people where you usually don't have access.
The International Crisis Group, by working with former President Marti Ahtisaari in developing a formula for Kosovo status, really kept people focused on it, presented some very important compromises and ideas.
What would Kosovo look like today had Crisis Group not been there, informing the diplomacy of particular member states at the UN, informing the mediation effort by Marti Ahtisaari. You have to do the counterfactual, I think, to really begin to imagine Crisis Group's impact.
The kind of work that was done was absolutely essential in analyzing the situation, presenting some alternatives, and working it through on a very action-oriented, hands-on basis.
We generally assume that those within their state borders are taken care of by their governments, are protected and assisted by the governments. In reality, many of these countries that are torn apart by conflict, they need to turn somewhere else for protection, and that is to the international community.
The moment Crisis Group came in, it drew attention. It exposed the desperate humanitarian situation in internally displaced camps, and that was tremendous because immediately the international community started paying attention. They reached out to see how they could help me. They reached out to talk to government, to persuade government to accept a negotiated settlement.
No meaningful negotiation can take place without cessation of hostilities.
Because of the specific recommendations that Crisis Group made and the pressure it put on the international community, that is why today we're very close to reaching peace agreement. That's why today people in internally displaced camps are beginning to go back home. That has made a huge difference in the lives of over 2 million people.
The main value, as far as I'm concerned, with the crisis group is that they have rightly put the emphasis on prevention, put the emphasis on responsibility to protect, and that is absolutely vital.
The crisis group is out there when things matter. To me, that's probably one of its most significant features. That's why its advocacy has some impact.
This is something that humanity at large needs.
It's kind of a full-service organization.
Their contribution to peace and security, to resolving conflicts, to helping people in desperate need, to ring the alarm bells of the international community, to be a mirror for the conscience of the world. That is a real value that comes from the International Crisis Group, and we should all be thankful that we have such an organization.